Confusion and anger in Silicon Valley and beyond. This follows the announcement from President Trump about his H-1B visas. The price tag now $100,000.
Some companies say that will leave them understaffed and lacking critical talent. But supporters believe the plan will create more jobs for Americans.
Trump just dropped a political hammer that Canada never saw coming. A $100,000 fee slapped onto every H-1B visa application.
Immigration.
The country would rather not have to pay $100,000, but they'd rather, how do you do that? You hire Americans.
An economic earthquake meant to force Silicon Valley giants like Amazon and Google to hire American workers first. No more cheap imports of foreign labor. It's bold, ruthless, and effective. And while CEOs in California are scrambling, the real shockwave is hitting north of the border. Because once again, Canada's fragile economy, glued together by trade dependency on the U.S., is cracking under the pressure. Mark Carney, the man who promised to shield Canada with global leadership and shiny trade deals, suddenly looks exposed, empty-handed, and weak. Rising costs, collapsing exports, and surging imports are setting the stage for a disaster. And Canadians are left wondering if anyone in Ottawa is awake. If you're ready to see how Trump's hammer is shattering Carney's illusions, hit like, subscribe, and keep watching. Let's break this down, because Trump's move wasn't just another policy tweak. It was a shock strike designed with one purpose: protect American workers. For decades, the H-1B visa program has been Silicon Valley's crutch. Tech giants leaned on it like addicts, importing tens of thousands of foreign workers on cheaper contracts, while American graduates were left on the sidelines. Trump looked at that system, shook his head, and said enough. From $3,000 per visa to $100,000 overnight. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a sledgehammer. The message was unmistakable. Hire American. Pay American. Or pay the price. And pay the price they did. Within hours of the announcement, reports surfaced of boardroom meltdowns across California. Google executives panicked, Amazon's HR team scrambled, and smaller startups froze in shock. Entire business models, built on the cheap pipeline of foreign talent, were suddenly unsustainable. Workers stuck in limbo faced confusion and fear, asking if their visa applications were dead in the water. The fallout was fast and brutal. Some companies started quietly shifting to automation, others began cutting perks, and many rushed to Washington with lobbyists demanding exemptions. But Trump didn't blink.
I think that it dramatically changes the hiring process.
That, according to a tech CEO who does business both here and in the UK. He says America stands to lose highly talented foreign workers to other countries who charge what the US used to charge, a few $1,000s per visa.
This wasn't about pleasing the tech elite. This was about proving that America's labor market was not for sale to the lowest bidder. And that's where Canada stumbled into the story. Not as a player, but as collateral damage. Because when Silicon Valley chokes, the smoke drifts north. Suddenly, displaced foreign workers, many from India and Southeast Asia, started eyeing Canada as a fallback. Ottawa's already overburdened temporary foreign worker program began to look like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Now remember, this isn't just about immigration paperwork. Canada's economy runs on dependency. The majority of its exports go straight to the US. Its housing market is inflated by immigration and speculation. Its workforce is stretched thin by rising costs. Add thousands of frustrated workers from America flooding across the border, and you've got a recipe for social and economic strain. But Carney, instead of preparing, was busy giving speeches about global responsibility and new opportunities. It was all words, no shield. And Canadians know it. The grocery bills prove it. Food prices climbed by double digits, housing became a nightmare, and small businesses couldn't find reliable staff. Ordinary people weren't fooled by Carney's smooth lines about diversification. They were asking one simple question: why is Trump protecting his workers while our prime minister lets us drown? This wasn't just bad optics, it was political suicide. Carney had spent months parading new trade agreements with the EU and Mexico, bragging about mineral supply deals and promising Canada wouldn't be left behind. But reality doesn't bend to press releases. Those deals haven't stopped Canadian exports from collapsing. They haven't stopped imports from surging. And they certainly haven't stopped costs from spiraling out of control for Canadian families. What Trump did in days, Carney has failed to deliver in years. That's the contrast that hits hardest. Trump can turn a pen stroke into an earthquake for the world's largest companies. Carney can't even stop the cracks in his own backyard. And it's those cracks that Canadians are starting to feel in their daily lives. Empty shelves, higher bills, longer hospital lines. But here's the twist. This wasn't the full picture. Because the deeper you look into Trump's visa sledgehammer, the clearer the geopolitical stakes become. It wasn't just about punishing Silicon Valley. It was about reshaping global labor flows, forcing countries like Canada to finally face the reality of their dependency. And what happened next would shock everyone. When the dust settled in Silicon Valley, the fallout looked less like a policy adjustment and more like a controlled demolition. Tech firms couldn't believe it. Trump had boxed them in. Either they absorbed astronomical visa costs or they shifted to hiring locally. Either way, the decades-long gravy train of cheap labor had screeched to a halt. And while CEOs scrambled to adjust, Carney's Canada started to look like the casualty of someone else's war. Ottawa had no warning, no leverage, and no plan. Foreign workers denied U.S. visas began applying en masse for Canadian programs. Provinces already struggling with housing and healthcare suddenly faced a tidal wave of new applicants. Mayors in Toronto and Vancouver were blunt. We can't handle this. But Carney kept repeating the same tired script about Canada's openness and shared prosperity. Shared prosperity? For who? Canadians weren't seeing it. Their paychecks were shrinking in real terms. Their rent kept rising. Their grocery carts got lighter every week. And the bitter irony? All of this was happening while Carney was busy boasting about Canada's global leadership role. Leadership? He couldn't even lead his own economy. Let's be clear, this wasn't just about visas. This was about a clash of visions. Trump's America First play was brutally simple. Use shock policies to protect U.S. workers and force companies to realign. Carney's Canada, by contrast, leaned on globalization, trade deals, and promises of long-term stability. But stability doesn't pay the bills when imports surge and exports collapse. Stability doesn't keep factories open when energy costs soar. Stability doesn't feed families when food inflation bites. And the Canadian public knew it. Polls showed trust in Carney collapsing. Anger bubbled in provinces like Alberta, where energy workers accused Ottawa of selling them out while Trump championed U.S. oil and gas. In Ontario, manufacturers fumed at high borrowing costs, while in Quebec, protests erupted over housing shortages. Everywhere you looked, the story was the same: frustration, fear, and fatigue. Meanwhile, Trump's policy, painted by critics as reckless, was gaining traction with ordinary Americans. The rhetoric of protecting American jobs resonated in the Midwest, in Rust Belt towns that had watched factories close for decades. Suddenly, Washington wasn't just talking, it was acting. And that action, no matter how messy, made Trump look decisive compared to Carney's endless speeches. And this contrast matters, because politics is perception. Americans saw a leader swinging a hammer to defend them. Canadians saw a leader shrugging while their economy burned. That gap in perception is why Trump looked strong while Carney looked weak. But here's where it gets worse for Canada. The surge of foreign workers eyeing Canada wasn't just an economic strain, it was a cultural flashpoint. Communities already divided over immigration levels now faced even sharper tensions. Indigenous groups warned that temporary worker expansions would trample their rights. Unions threatened strikes over wage suppression. Small towns braced for social unrest. This wasn't the inclusive prosperity Carney had promised. It was chaos. And still, Ottawa hesitated. Instead of firm policies, Canadians got lectures about patience. Instead of relief, they got higher taxes and ballooning deficits. Instead of leadership, they got global conferences and buzzwords. The more Carney talked, the clearer it became. He was playing a game of appearances, not survival. Trump, by contrast, was unapologetic. He told reporters straight, if companies want foreign workers, they can pay for them. My job is to put Americans first. Short, sharp, brutal, and effective. That one sentence cut deeper than a dozen of Carney's speeches. It told people exactly where Trump stood. It told people who he was fighting for, and Canadians noticed. Many began asking, why don't we have that kind of leadership? Why don't we have someone who acts instead of talks? Why don't we have someone willing to take risks for citizens instead of chasing applause at international summits? This is why Trump's move did more than disrupt Silicon Valley. It exposed Canada's fragility for the world to see. It showed that without the US, Canada is an addict, dependent on trade, reliant on labor inflows, and incapable of standing on its own. Trump's hammer didn't just crush tech CEOs, it crushed Carney's credibility. So here we are, two countries, two leaders, and two very different outcomes. Trump swung the hammer and Silicon Valley felt the quake. American workers saw a president fighting for them. Meanwhile, Canada got speeches, buzzwords, and a leader who can't plug the holes in a sinking ship. Mark Carney's vision of global leadership? Exposed as hollow. His promises of diversification? Empty. His response to real-world crises? Non-existent. And Canadians are the ones paying the price, at the checkout line, in the housing market, and in their jobs. The question now isn't just about economics, it's about survival. How long will Canadians tolerate a government that talks about the future while ignoring the present? How long before frustration turns into a full-blown revolt against failed leadership? If you want leaders who act instead of talk, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, has Carney already lost Canada?